Hi, this is Paul, and back by popular demand, the pastor of the Discord, Job. And Job, you were, you were early on, in my channel, and it was so much fun spending some time with you just at the beginning of COVID before everything went nuts.
That was so much fun. I mean, it was too much fun, and that's why COVID had to stop it because I
Well,
mean, I remember when I was trying to figure out how to get my phone to play an interview with Tom Holland on John Van Donk's radio, and then he has this cheap Bluetooth thing that transmits a signal on a radio frequency, and it's broken, and I can't get it to work, and I'm struggling with this thing, and I look behind me, and you're filming it with your phone. Like, I should have known that a Calvinist would do such a thing, but
God remembers. I just want a reminder.
yeah, I mean, but just so many good memories of that trip. That was just so much fun. So yeah, John Van Donk told me that I had to discuss the upcoming plans for a trip. So why don't we start with that? Because I have no idea what he's on about.
I don't know either, but just that the northern part of the trip we do have to do, and we do have to finish that trip at some point. So we'll wait until you have to come back to Southern California for some work thing again, and we'll schedule it, and it'll happen. So I'm not worried about that.
No, I definitely want to try it again. And yeah, just we had this whole distance to go and all these places to see. So yeah, and maybe this time, we can get some other Discorders to join in the great trek northwards, and hope we don't lose anyone to dysentery halfway through. An Oregon Trail joke for you
That's
young
right.
people.
That's right.
Uh, so
Well, where do
yeah,
you want to start, Job? I know you've got a list, so we can start with your list.
let me open the list. Uh, okay, so we talked about a road trip. Uh,
Vendonk always has a list. I don't know. I posted my conversation with Vendonk. I mean, he always, when we have a talk, he always comes with this whole thing of what I'm going to say and what John's going to say. It's like, John, we can do without all these details. So I don't know if you watched that video yet. I give him a hard time about the list.
Yeah, I did watch it, and it's probably something we should talk about. One thing I need to get off the list is because I promised Sam Adams I would wear my new hoodie. So here to prove I have my new Søren Kierkegaard hoodie. Uh, and so here's a fun thing. My pastor was over recently because I was helping him setting up his YouTube live streaming because he wants to do videos where he kind of talks about stuff in the Bible, and then people can live react on a live stream. I said, sure, I'll help out. And we're kind of talking, and I'm, fiddling with the computer, and he's like, oh, by the way, Job, would you be interested in joining confirmation catechism classes? Like, he's
Oh,
like,
you haven't been confirmed yet?
no, I mean that doesn't happen by
Oh,
default. I think
no.
I've been baptized as a child, but I wasn't really aware of that. So uh, he says, how about that? And I said, well, to be honest, I think I replied something in the sense of it's interesting that you mentioned that because I have been kind of finding myself in this idea that I'm pretty sure God exists. Like, I can't get out of that frame anymore because I try, and then I go like, you know what? I'm getting way too much into this religious business. I'm going to take a couple steps back, and I'm gonna get back to my nice terra firma, my nice Descartesian pure rationale. And then I try to find that, and I can't find that anymore. I mean, I've read enough about Descartes to know that he's like, I'm going to establish terra firma, just I doubt, therefore I exist. But his entire frame of that being possible and the world being intelligible and the idea that he could be aware of his own consciousness and trust his consciousness to not lie to him, and even the language he spoke in, and all that, there was already a whole terra firma outside his terra firma that there is no really objective anything we can reach toward. And you've been dealing with this in your recent videos, so that's been particularly interesting. So it's I've been just reading books and books and books, sort of with a frenzy almost. That I've asked myself, why am I reading books at a speed at which what am I trying what am I trying to reach within a certain time? Like, why am I so rushed trying to understand things? It's kind of like this. Imagine I'm in an old library and I'm sitting on the stack of books, and there's like, a candle burning and some raven perched atop of something. And I'm just, going through books. And, God walks by in the form of some old librarian saying, "What are you doing there, son?" I'm like, "Well, I think God's in here somewhere. And it's got to be one of these books, because I've gotten close, and there's like books about Aristotle and, Leibniz and all that stuff." And he's like, "All right, son, well, you do that and let me know where you find him." I'm like, yeah. It's kind it's kind of like that. And I mean, the interesting part is that by now, honestly, you'd have to convince me God doesn't exist. And you'd have to convince me Jesus didn't rise from the dead, because I've just read all these books and I can't really go anywhere anymore at this point. Like, that it seems to be the case. I've basically just convinced my rational self, or at least that part that's always skeptical, that, well, there's not, Bucko, there's no way to run. I've got you in a corner. Here are the conclusions. You've come to these conclusions. You've agreed with every step. Now what? Well, shit. Yeah, that's a very good. Now what? Because, abstract philosophical theism, in the sense that Edward Feser writes it, is fun and good. But then it's like, okay, God exists. Why does God exist, and why do I exist, and how does that relate? And then I found this very interesting book. Let me quickly bring it up on Kindle. My wife bought me a Kindle, and it's been the worst because this just feeds into it. Let's see.
That's right. Your book reading is no longer limited by time, and well, it's limited by time still, but not space.
Oh no, pure convenience now. Like, oh, this is on Kindle. Oh, it's cheap. Oh, I'll buy this. It's
no, it's terrible.
Investigating the Resurrection of Jesus Christ by Andrew Loke. It's multidisciplinary, so he brings all these disciplines together and synthesizes them into a coherent argument for the resurrection of Christ. But I mean, I've just been reading so many books, like What We Can't Not Know by Budziszewski on natural law and morality, and I've been trying to get through Aristotle's Revenge by Feser, which is really difficult to understand. What's this? Oh, the Blackwell Companion to Natural Theology. And
why is that book free for me?
Yeah, it is free on Kindle.
Oh,
that was a surprise too.
Bang!
And
another one bites the dust.
I found some new arguments in there that I hadn't seen before. But I mean, that is a really big deal that I would have, if somebody said to me, "Well, Job, why do you believe this?" I'd have to say, well, here's a stack of books. You go read these, and then we can have this conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's not like I can memorize it all, and I would be hard-pressed to say I understand everything I read, especially when I'm reading like, Blackwell's Companion to Natural Theology, and it's about argument from consciousness with, physical closure and qualia and the argument from reason and teleology, and some of this stuff is really complex. I've been really getting into analytical Thomism and general Thomistic philosophy. So I've been reading Bishop Barron a lot, Jacques Maritain, Gabriel Marcel, John Haldane, a guy called Olderberg, who wrote a book called Real Essentialism. And that's basically Aristotelian Thomistic metaphysics, but as a counter. He argues against positions from modalism and reductionism, and it's really difficult but really interesting. Jacques Maritain is just really hard to read because it's existential Thomism. But yeah, Job has a Thomistic face. That's so cute. Like, I'm really interested in Catholicism. I got to find a way to like smuggle a 3-foot statue of Mary into my Protestant church without them noticing. So yeah, that's. But I like to make jokes to lighten these sorts of conversations. But it is really difficult to. Here's what I thought would happen, and this draws back to the Faith Over Breakfast chat I had, where I was kind of coming to similar conclusions about the necessity of God. And I said that I clearly don't believe it because it would rip my worldview apart. That didn't happen. It just happened very gradually without me noticing. So you wake up.
You thought the little conscious the guy moving the mouth was the guy in charge of your consciousness Congress, right? And you didn't recognize that you're not as in charge of you as you think.
I sort of understood that the elephant that barged into a church 2 years ago and the writer was still trying to find where the hell he'd gone. But it was more in the sense of it should just rip everything to shreds, and that just didn't happen. Sometimes I'd have these weird inklings of it, like I'd be standing waiting for the train somewhere, and I'd feel like, this sky I'm looking at, and this landscape I'm looking at, that's not just me. There's more here than me, and that sounds weird and that sounds wooey, but that's the best I can describe it. And I think these days it's more like, I can't get around that. You'd have to come with pretty good arguments to convince me nowadays that God would not exist.
Yeah.
And I think the best I could do these days is to hide in the great I don't know from agnosticism. But even then, you'd have to explain to me that, well, if the mind is immaterial, which it seems to be, and I still have trouble understanding these arguments, but it seems to be the fact that abstracts exist what's called propositions exist, and then the fact that we can communicate concepts that we refer to in the abstract, that subjective experiences exist.
They govern tremendously.
So the hardest thing is, there's a play called Salome. Are you familiar with it?
No.
It was written by Oscar Wilde.
Oh yeah, I've quoted from it in a number of sermons.
I'll quote a bit from it.
That's where Herod gets upset that Jesus rose from the dead and said he's not allowed to rise from the dead.
Yes, that's exactly the part I wanted to quote because it's so good.
I haven't actually read great classics. I've just listened to a lot of Tim Keller sermons, and he pulls them out for me, and I just footnote them.
So Herod says, "What is this miracle of the daughter of Jairus?" And first Nazarene says, "The daughter of Jairus was dead. He raised her from the dead." Herod says, "He raised the dead?" "Yes, sire, he raised the dead." "I do not wish him to do that. I forbid him to do that. I allow no man to raise the dead. This man must be found and told that I forbid him to raise the dead. Where is this man at present?" "Oh, he is in every place, my lord, but it is hard to find him." Beautiful. But that's very much how I felt when I started to work with these things. Like, no, I don't like this at all. I was kind of hoping I'd be done after I died, like, okay, cool, whatever I am, whatever strange consequence of natural processes I am, I pretty much would like this thing to be over at some point. But I have to wrestle with the potential consequences that is not the case. I can joke about it all I want, but that is really difficult.
Yeah.
And I mean, I can say, okay, I've been pretty much convinced that Jesus rose from the dead. That's even more major because that means that not only is there a God, but it's a very particular God who wants particular things and has particular end goals. That changes the way you walk down the street, Paul. I mean, you'd know.
Yeah.
But I mean, and there's still this thing in my head going, no, we can ignore this. Like bullshit. You and I have read enough books to know this is kind of no longer doable. Yeah, but maybe it's all a scam. Maybe you've misunderstood the arguments. You've probably just been misled. I mean, you're supposed to look at religious people and say, yeah, those religious people, they just.
They've been
But
duped. They're good
yeah,
enough,
yeah,
and they need that sometimes. But
yeah, they're rational in most things apart from that little thing, and we forgive them for it.
yeah, yeah. I
And
was
I'm
just
looking at that like it's such an enlightenment thing.
yeah.
I especially when you start to read these philosophers, you start to really. It's kind of this weird. What's the right English word for that? I can't find the word, but there's this weird idea that like people in the time of Aristotle would basically just sound sort of ignorantly, you know, it's like those peasants in the quest for the Holy Grail, where they're just throwing mud on the ground. That's all they did.
Yeah.
They didn't wrestle with real things.
Yeah.
And, Aristotle would, but, what did he know? He sort of figured some things out. And I'm reading Aristotle. There's a 1978 book, Aristotle for Everybody. And yeah, it's I gave sorry, I'm just hopping from subject to subject,
That's
but
fine.
I gave a presentation at work about the last 150 years and the way that our ideas of what the future would be like changed in the sense of how technology changed.
Yeah.
So I've been reading Neil Postman and various other people. And these views that I've held, that I figured were the proper, reasonable, rational views, God, they're so young. And they're so built out of the same Christian framework. I mean, Tom Holland says this,
Yeah.
Peterson said it, but you kind of agree with that. But then you start reading these books, you're like, shit, I've been duped. But I mean, it is the weirdest thing. Like maybe can change my mind still, but that idea I had that I still have my lifeline back to atheism. I can quit anytime I want. No. God, that's just it's wonderful and awful at the same time, because it changes so much and it puts so much in different perspectives, but it's also terrifying. And then I very much get that Petersonian, like we don't know, we just don't know. We're separated from infinity by ignorance and death. No one knows. And then his like, maybe if you really lived the way you could, maybe then you would say, maybe then you can say that you believe. And that's when I can go right back to my pastor asking me, would you like to take confirmation classes? Because that brings in this entire conversation that we just, like, I said I would, but no guarantees, man, that I go in church and kneel down and you say something nice about how I asked all these questions during the classes. Because I'll consider it as a fun discussion group, but I don't even know what it means to say that. Yeah. So
You're already acting as if you're confirmed.
How so?
Well, after confirmation, how will your life be different?
It won't. It seems to be a sort of thing towards the church, because the church's been fishing at me, like, oh, we want to do this other podcast. Do you want to help on that? And hey, Joe, church council. Like, no. Okay, but church council, no. I'm not getting involved with that. That's for me. Yeah, that's what I said 2 years ago about something else. Huh?
Someone, I'm going to link this in a playlist to all of our other conversations. And a summary of all of our talks is Job talks about what he won't do, and I laugh. That's that's our entire relationship, Job.
Yeah, it's one big Meatloaf song.
I'm amazed at how much American culture you Dutch know. It's astounding.
Yeah. I watched Transformers on a black and white TV. Don't judge me. I didn't know they had colors. So yeah, Paul.
Well, a point
Oh,
that you
none of
were
this was
making about
supposed to
it
happen.
shredding your life. I mean, part of you, so a deep part of you won't let your life get shredded too much, and that acts kind of like a governor on the speed of change. And that's actually quite a blessing, because your wife is dependent upon you, society is dependent upon you, your the other firefighters are dependent upon you, so it's built into you. But the transformation that you're undergoing obviously isn't new. It's um it's not even surprising, because so many have done it, but it's new to you, obviously. And but it's also, you know it's just so interesting having it documented the way we have it. And how um I was reading some of the Bridges of Meaning chat this morning, and just really it was just really amazed, and um, I want to say gratified by some of the community that I see having happened there and is happening there, and the relationships that have built, even on a thin medium like Discord, which is a glorified internet chat room. But it's really quite remarkable. And the thing is, I mean, you look at confirmation. I think it'll happen. But where else does this go? And that's always a fair question, because the change isn't going to stop. It goes at different speeds, usually according to what the rest of your life can and can't permit, in terms of keeping all of your relationships and everything going. But I think I mean, what's interesting is that the church, on one hand, churches are, I mean, one of my deacons has been pestering Rick about, you need to become a deacon. And she tells me that, and I says, well, first he needs to be baptized. First he needs to, before he can be a leader in the church, he kind of needs to be a member of the church. And that being a member of the church involves this and this and this and this and this. And so, Rick, who is in church every Sunday and helping us with our media stuff, and Rick's a very private person. I'm sure he'll get annoyed that I'm talking about him as publicly as I am, but that's too bad, Rick. Once you're friends with a YouTube pastor, your life is kind of fodder for this kind of thing.
Sorry,
But
Rick.
it's too bad you didn't get a chance to get up to Sacramento, because then you would have met Rick. And you would have met
Definitely.
his brother Mike. That would have been.
I've heard of Mike.
Yeah, I know. Oh, you'll have to, because it's really fun meeting both of them, because you'll when you meet them, you'll figure it out. But and what this is going to do, though, is also continue to change the church. And because often what churches get are deacons and elders who have only known the church, so they've only known the inside of it. And yeah, in confirmation classes, you're going to ask uncomfortable questions. And because the questions you have aren't going away, and they're not going to go away, but that's actually a good thing, because it is going to force the church to wrestle with them. And it's in that process that the church continues to be strengthened and grow. And I'm just really pleased that you have a pastor who isn't scared of that, because bad things
Yeah.
happen when you have pastors that are scared of that.
I was thinking about that thing today, like how lucky I am to have the pastor I do, because I mean, he knows I'm kind of shirking against Catholicism, and he thinks that's interesting, and he's expressed, like he said to me as much, like, well, I'm kind of thinking we should go more towards the mysterious, and like, yeah, and maybe we should have Lord's Supper every week. Well, man, not just yet, but yeah, but he doesn't mind wrestling with those things, and he's wondering where the church should go. And yeah, so I think this whole religious thing, this whole confirmation thing, part of it's a sort of weird Stockholm syndrome-ish kind of stuff. I think no, I'm not. I'm
I know
honest in the
you're
sense
serious.
that
It's just hilarious.
I was so attached to my life being meaningless and pointless. I kind of, it's not fun to just that. Wait, no. Oh, it's not possible for that to not be the case. I mean, the fact that my life would be anything apart from that is just, it's absolutely terrifying. I still hope I'm wrong. I'd rather be wrong. But rationally, I have to accept that it's not the case. If anything, there's something in me that's immaterial. What the fuck? It's not supposed to happen.
Yeah.
Seriously, I mean, maybe I still hope it's wrong.
Oh, yeah, I bet you don't. I mean, that's just it. I mean, I loved when Poe asked me if I thought she believed in God when I'm having my
God, that
first
was
conversation with her.
beautiful. That was beautiful. The
Yeah.
way she, sorry, Poe, you might be watching, but the way that Poe responded to your response in a sort of relief, that question was like, is there hope for me?
Yeah.
That was absolutely beautiful. I loved seeing that. And yeah, we, like you've said so many times, we wrestle with these things, and we wrestle with God in more ways than one. Yeah, I can do a callback to my first conversation with you. Still, everything's better than it ever was. So why am I complaining?
Well,
Let
you're the fear of the
no,
Lord
no,
is the beginning of wisdom,
sure.
and you're aware enough and awake enough to know that there is a degree of terror that underlies this because we are ridiculously outmatched. And part of the way we manage that aspect of our lives is denial. And
Mm,
and so what happens when you get closer to God, you just have to relinquish a lot of this denial and say, all right, well, I can no longer imagine that I'm in charge of my life. I mean, I'm not even in charge of my own beliefs and thoughts half the time. And then, again, I was watching Brett and Heather's Number 50. I was listening to it this morning because, of course, when they went where they went on that podcast, all kinds of people just messaged me, listen to Brett and Heather, and they're poking at what you've been hitting with a stick. One person writes to me, and I listened to them, and it it reminds me. So when my oldest son was young, we lived in the Dominican Republic. I grew up in an age when we had a station wagon and there were no seatbelts or anything. We hopped between seats during long car rides, and that's just the liberty that we lived with. And of course, my son, who was born in 91, is born in an age suddenly when there's seatbelts and there's car seats, and we lived in the Dominican Republic where you'd see really brutal accidents because nothing was enforced. And so I remember one day he was moving around a little bit. He was a little older he was probably 2-ish or something. Well, we forgot to buckle him in when we were backing out of the driveway, and he just kind of freaks out like the car's moving and I'm not buckled in. And so, and it's like, oh, okay, hang on. We're just in the driveway here. It's not at the end but he's a 2-year-old. It's the only world he's ever known. And I listened to Brett and Heather, and so often I listen to Brett especially, and he's like, we gotta buckle the world in and it's like, oh, Brett, there's so much more to be terrified of than just this. And do you really think that car seat is gonna do it for us? It's just a failure to recognize just how fragile life is, and how, well, the just will live by faith. Well, what does that mean? It means that you really don't have any other option, that all this denial is, it's just my 2-year-old's faith in his car seat. It's like,
I have a segue for that. At some point, I got kind of, I noticed I was reading things that I found myself agreeing with, but I couldn't, it didn't go anywhere. Like, okay, you know what? I'm going to force the issue. So I went to CatholicWoodworker.com and I ordered some rosaries. I already had rosaries ordered there before. And I ordered one of those nice wooden Catholic crucifixes. And then I said to my wife, do you mind if I hang this in the bedroom? And, it's a Catholic crucifix. It's got a Jesus on it. And she's like, yeah, that's okay. Like, won't bother you? No. Okay, cool. So, I hung it in the bedroom. And then I just saw if I could get used to that. And I could. And I noticed it kind of brought God in as a more, not in an not an idol kind of way, but more in a reminding kind of way. And I don't know when I started doing this, but at some point I just sort of started kicking it up a notch. Like, okay, I know what I'll do. When I go to bed, I kiss that cross, I get on my knees, I pray the Our Father. That's all I do. And I just start doing it every evening. Seriously. Just act as if. See what happens. And at some point, that's just what you do. And it starts to become sort of a thing of comforting. And this Our Father becomes from this very simple prayer, becomes this very complex thing in how Peterson would say, how you position yourself in relation to reality. You ask, give me that I may have what I have today, that I relate to people the way I'd want them to relate to me. I forgive their debts, they forgive me mine. Hallowed be your name. How do I engage to God? How do I engage to reality? So it becomes sort of this antenna tuning that you do. But another thing happened, and that's that my wife said one morning, yeah, things starting to smell weird. Have you noticed things are stinky? Like, no. Yeah, things are just smelly. And my boobs are sore. I'm like, oh, maybe you should take a pregnancy test. And she's pregnant, turns out. And you're telling about, having faith and putting things in God's hands. That put me with my nose right on it. I mean, because suddenly my wife was pregnant. No, I mean, my wife was pregnant. And there's somewhat this existential aperture you have that's kind of like this, sort of your relevance realization. It's very small. Suddenly it's like it opens wide and then it goes right back exactly on your wife. Like, this is now the most important thing. And I didn't know what else to do than put it in God's hands. Like, God, there's nothing I can do to control this. I have no control here whatsoever. I leave it to you. That's all I'm doing. Like, please make sure this goes well. Yeah. And of course, you thank God, and you don't know what that means, but you're happy your wife's pregnant, and you thank God. And now I have to think of Susan Blackmore and being very grateful to things.
I know.
But man, that was a snarky video, Paul. So
I couldn't help it. I mean, I just saw her on there, and then she's like, I just nihilism, and I'm just thinking, really?
Yeah, no. Pull the other one. Yeah. But I just remember walking to work, and it just really, really confronted me with my absolute puny self. And I'd be in the bus on the way to work. We had a period where COVID was low enough that I could travel to the office. Like, well, I have a decade rosary with me. I might as well pray this in the bus. And also in a sense of, I don't want to, I want to be comfortable with doing these things, and I want to properly relate to this in a way that I think is right, whatever that means. Now, we didn't know when she'd gotten pregnant, so we had an echo taken, and they already, I don't know, this is either very young or it's already stopped. Come back in 2 weeks. That makes you pray.
Yeah.
Oh, that
Yeah.
makes you pray.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Not in a, God, please change your mind, but in a like, I don't know what else I can do, and all I can do is kind of point myself to God, whatever that means. But after 2 weeks, we found out that it was a miscarriage,
Yeah.
and well, I thought I dealt with that well, but that still that really
Yeah.
that that valley of the shadow of death, that exists. Oh, it's dark and low, and I would be lying if I said that the Discord wasn't a huge factor in me being able to crawl out of that again. And and God, those things will confront you with your insignificance, and your and how important just that tiny thing is that's growing there, and you have no control whether it lives or dies.
Yeah.
So, geez, at least I had a religious frame, what do you do if you're not religious and you deal with this?
Yeah.
It's just, it's just, you know, an organic process going bad.
Yeah.
Is it just, our chimp impulses making us feel sorrowful? I mean, it confronts you with all sorts of questions that aren't new, and all the lamentations. And I've identified in the last half year a lot more with my first name, and I've gotten to really appreciate my first name.
Yeah. Well,
So
I regularly have conversations with people who either have no Christian faith or left, um, have discarded their Christian faith or have watered it down, and they find themselves in a hole. And again, a hole is just such a beautiful metaphor, because if you've ever been in a hole like that's been dug, I mean, it's really hard to get out of a hole because the sides are dirt, and you do need a rope, or you need something tangible. And so something comes up in someone's life, and because they might have a relationship with me, because they used to go to church or something like that, and then they're in a hole, and I I know I have things that would help, but they've given them away. And so, I use kind of um, I have to use the over the counter medication instead of the prescription stuff. And I bump into this all the time in this deconstructing culture, where people, when everything is going well, people tend to not worry about saving money, or, working, or for a rainy day or anything like that. And so, well, in our cultures, life goes pretty well. And it's a pretty remarkable society that we've built. But when it eventually comes, you will wind up in a hole. And that hole might be a miscarriage, that hole might be a cancer diagnosis, that hole might be a betrayal, that hole might be a surgery. At some point, the day of the Lord comes to each of us, and we recognize that we recognize the truth about ourselves, our smallness, our vulnerability, and okay, I don't have much for you. I just got the over the counter stuff, and it'll be okay. It might not. Then I'm kind of lying to them. it'll be okay. Well, it might not be okay. And but they've thrown away their ability to grab onto something more real and tangible. And yeah, and as a pastor, then I am frustrated by that, but I can't help them unless they ask for it.
Mm.
And sometimes they will. Sometimes they'll say something to me that says, I'm open to you relaying something to me that affords, or at least presumes or assumes, more faith. Okay, I can give you some of the stuff behind the counter, but that's a reality in our world right now. But as Eric Weinstein said, we've had 75 good years. Yeah, we have had 75 good years. We don't know what the next few decades will bring. But if you look at human history, 75 is a pretty long, good run for a lot of people. You not hear me?
Lost audio, Paul.
Everything's
It's my network connection. You're back.
Okay. So I was saying, 75 years is a good run for a civilization, but storms come. They always do.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, that's for sure. Yeah. There's probably something else I could have said about this that I can't think of now. I don't know. It it sure makes you pray a lot differently. And yeah, I was just glad there were a lot of people around me that I could go to.
yeah.
Um,
Well, that's
yeah.
another factor. I mean, one factor is the psychological, but the other factor is the communal. That it means something that the community has a shared ethos and a shared rituals and traditions about how to deal with loss amongst us. And again, churches have that, but I see, and part of what I see COVID doing is people are sort of stuck in their own individual family units. And if they don't have a family, they're living alone. Or it's all the governmental stuff, which is just way too far up here. And the mediating institutions, organizations, relationships, communities, they're all sort of being cleared out. And that's going to be a real problem for people as we go forward. So I don't know how it is in the Netherlands, but I see that happening in the States.
No, that's happening here as well, and we are so confronted with the fact that we at this point do anything for just putting an arm around each other, and how fundamental little things are, and at the same time you see this sort of shocking realization, as far as that wasn't already the case, that we know that at the moment we are able to do that again, we will also do these other things that we shouldn't be doing.
Yeah.
And that basically the whole, well, if you have the freedom to do one thing, you're also gonna eat the damn fruit. Stop doing it.
Yeah.
So especially reading about the last 150 years of history, like, will we please, global warming, that'll bring us together and we'll finally fix the world. We can't even agree on wearing a mouth thing. I mean, Calvinism would have things to say about this, but yeah, we can't help ourselves. We're just yeah, we can't. We're unable to. We're very much that monkey with its hands in the jar, and it refuses to let go of the sweet food that it found.
Yeah.
Like, no, we want to keep this. Well, if you let it go, maybe. Yeah, I mean, the marshmallow test showed as much.
So a couple months ago, you asked me, or you talked to me a little bit about Andrew Root's book.
Oh man. Yeah, what do you think?
I really have to reread that book more carefully. Some parts of that book I read and thought, mean, that one chapter that I read in one of my videos where he just sort of goes through the, what word should I use? The secularization of the pastoral vocation. And it was like, wow, because again, I'm a third generation minister. And so even just from my grandfather, who his first church, I believe he took in 1932. So we don't, between my grandfather, my father and I, we don't quite have 100 years of ministry between us. But it was just so telling, these flagship pastors and how the ministry was constructed around them, and what the culture did to them. And of course, it was most accessible to see the neo-orthodoxy and the mid 20th century ones, because, you know, of course I was born in the 60s. So but I you know, I found it just as a pastor, but I didn't find him affording a lot of answers in the book. And that's where the Discord, someone had posted a blog by an Australian pastor in Melbourne talking about Tom Holland's conversation with Glenn Scrivener.
That was good.
And I want to do, you know, it's part of the reason I want to do a commentary video on that talk with Glenn, because part of the reason I do these things is because it forces me to slow down and look at them more carefully. And in the process of walking through them, I see more. And then if I'm recording, then I can go back and see what I've seen because I forget. But I didn't find Root as helpful with leaning forward and talking about what's next. And that's where I find Peterson and Tom Holland more helpful. Not that they necessarily are affording answers, because I don't know that. I think this stuff is going to be much more stumbled into, and after we're in it a while, we look at each other and say, oh yeah, this is right. That takes time. So but I think that's where Holland and Peterson are helpful, because I see a lot of clergy saying, oh, things have changed, and clergy in a sense have a better view behind us, because the church is sort of an obsessive archivist that keeps records on the past. And I look at Holland and I look at Peterson and think, these guys are more shining a light into the future and saying, huh. And so as Christians sort of stumble into that future, I think we're going to continue to see more of what we've seen throughout church history, which is almost always a reappropriation of the past, but in slightly new ways because of the new contexts that we're in. And part of that is like you said earlier about our visions of the future from the past. We're really bad at it because technology over the last 200 years has just so simply radically changed the nuts and bolts of biological, physical existence for us.
Yeah.
So I've been reading Will Durant's Rousseau and Revolution. You know, if you're not looking for books to read, but Will Durant is a very interesting guy. He got a degree in philosophy from Columbia in the 20s and spent his life writing this 11-volume. I mean, my wife bought it just because she could pull out stories for her Waldorf teaching really easily but she bought it on used, this huge set of books where he has the story of civilization. And now it's modernist and it's mid 20th century, but he basically started working on this in the 30s, and then eventually got married and had a daughter and kept writing it. And his wife and daughter really became collaborators with him. And then got all the way through Napoleon, and then just basically ran out of life. But he's such a good writer, and he has such clever ways of kind of quipping things. And so I've been reading a lot on the 18th century, a century I didn't know enough about, and just having the experience of things haven't changed that much since the 18th century. Technology has radically altered how we live in certain ways, and many of the visions of the 18th century have come to fruition. But the basic framing of the United States government, that's all 18th century stuff. You know, Franklin and Jefferson were very carefully reading the French philosophers. Both Franklin and Jefferson were, both of them were very. 18th century was, France was the place to be in the 18th century, but it was so horribly mismanaged that it, resulted in the revolution, and then of course resulted in Napoleon, and on from there. But that 18th century history is really valuable now, because as we are moving away from Enlightenment assumptions, the truth of them continues to hold, but the stuff that isn't as well tethered is what's letting loose now. And so in some ways, the whole IDW I really see now as sort of, a group of people that one way or another really don't want to let go of the 18th century. And they're part of them is going to have to, but we're not at all sure. And we're going to want to preserve some of the good things of the 18th century. But, if you compare the 18th century with the 21st century, it's just radically different. So I was really curious. All that is way too much chatter, but I was really curious,
Right.
what grabbed you about Root's book?
Oh man, sometimes you read a book and it's just bam, and you can't put it down. I think I get different things from it than you do, because to me, mainly, it was a very interesting look into the history of how faith was performed, what the Reformation did. I mean, just as someone who was raised Protestant, I wasn't too exposed to what it was like to be Catholic or Orthodox. So the idea that you lived this liturgical year, and that in church you were sort of taken back in time by the priest, who was the interpreter and the explainer, into the story, and then the Protestant Reformation came, and to simplify it, say, okay, you can encounter God while cleaning out the pigsty. If you do it with the right intent, you can meet God anywhere. You don't need a priest to intercede for your sins. You can ask God to forgive your sins. I mean, that was major. And the way that just moved on, and then you got the 1950s post-war prosperity, where we as a society became more isolated. We had our TV and our car and our air conditioning, and the normal Rockwell paintings with the family going on holiday in the car, and we became more isolated. But there was also itself, I think, more possible because of Protestantism. I'm not sure if that's true. But okay, so in these visions of the future, here's what you see. In the 1880s, 1900s, things start to go very fast. Like, I gave this presentation, and I started with a picture of this huge basilisk in the south of the Netherlands, the Saint Servatius basilisk. I said, let's say you're in the year 1000. You're a mason. You built on this thing for 60 years, and then you die or you retire, and the thing is still not done. And your father worked on it, and your grandfather worked on it. and the church is still not finished. That's how life went. Stuff didn't change all that fast. And then suddenly in 1880 until 1920, so many things get invented, like absolutely amazing. Like the Haber-Bosch process to synthesize ammonia, the Halle-Héroult process to melt aluminum, liquefied oxygen. I mean, I have this whole list of stuff that got invented in front of your eyes in 20 years. You could see the world change from whale blubber lighting to electricity, and airships with docking stations on the Empire State Building. I mean, clearly we've pulled ourselves by our bootstraps out of the swamp of ignorance, and we were on to the brave new world. There was this little war brewing, but we have that fixed in a couple months. Yeah. And that war punched Enlightenment rationality straight in the mouth. Yeah. That put a dent in the white man's manifest destiny idea that we would civilize the world. Yeah. And even what you see is we go through cycles of war and genocide and optimism, war, safety, optimism, and we're kind of in one of those cycles now, it seems. And we still want that flying car, but why was I saying all this? I think it has to do with what you see technology do. Is in the 1800s, it was still very much technology will move the nation forward. It will move society forward. And then in the 1970s, 1980s, after birth control, after Watson and Crick's discovery of DNA, it becomes technology moves the individual forward. And that is, I think that's very important. So faith became way more individual. Also post 1960s, we will destroy the old and we will create the new. True identity is what's most important. You know, the sacrament of the sacred self that you've often talked about. Yep. Then together with technology will elevate us. Yeah. Because we can't trust the system. The system will corrupt. Capitalism contains its own destruction. The 1984 or Brave New World. Either way, the society is doomed. The individual has to save itself and maybe the community. And then you see that, well, we will elevate ourselves. And suddenly there's Weinstein, because he'll say the same thing. But the whole thing is they don't know where. We'll elevate ourselves to what? We're primates. Where the hell are you supposed to go? Banana land? You have no idea. Well, so that everybody's happy. Yeah, note from the underground. There's nothing there either. We'll make sure that nobody suffers anymore. Okay, now we're all just not suffering. Now you've created Brave New World. We've all taken our soma and there's still nothing there. And the people, oh yeah, but the people have, it's for their own good. Oh, now you're creating 1984 and Brave New World. Well, good luck with that. And I think those things as well are manifestations of also Protestantism. Yeah. And Taylor would say that. Yeah. And Root, in a degree, also quotes Taylor on those things. And that's why that I was already researching my presentation about technology. So I see that book and it's just click, 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 you know. And then he has this other book, Faith Formation in a Secular Age, which is more a sort of an accessible Taylor. Yeah. Because you know, yeah. I mean, I use Taylor's book to press liquid out of things.
But what was me? I got it in Kindle format.
If you're asking me why do those books grab you, is because they confront me with my presuppositions. And you know, like I'm reading all these books about Catholicism and like this really that analytical Thomistic philosophy, and like I'm not used to thinking about reality like this, and it's scary because it confronts me with God. Yeah. So that's why I liked Andrew Root's books. I haven't read the third one.
I haven't either. I read the Pastoring in a Secular Age, and I picked up the other one, but I haven't read it yet.
What else have
Oh,
I been reading?
well, and it's also interesting. It's also interesting that while your pastor is poking at you to think about confirmation, because he's looking down the road too. You're playing around with Catholic. How should I say it?
Heresies.
Oh,
No, just joking.
here's the thing about Protestantism, because I feel entitled to take pokes at Protestantism because I am one and I'm not planning on leaving it.
Yeah.
I think in a lot of ways we are, and Ryan Bennett, keeps bringing this up, we are really still working through the consequences of the Protestant Reformation. And there is so on one hand, it's not too hard to point at some of the losses that the Protestant innovations suffered, but it's also not terribly easy to dispel some of the critiques that the Protestants made against the old regime.
Oh, no.
So again, I've been reading 18th century French history, and Voltaire, Voltaire is just a giant in that world, but there are many around him as well. And the Christendom was, how can I say this? There was the Roman Catholic Church in the late medieval period had a serious tyranny problem. And that was exhibited in the incident with Jan Hus, with Martin Luther, and even when you get to the 18th century, Voltaire is going, he's in France, and it's very interesting. I'd really love to get there someday. So you have France, and then you have Geneva. And of course, I've never really until now fully appreciated the dynamic relationship that Geneva had with France, or really that the Netherlands and Switzerland had with the other powers around them, because the Netherlands and Switzerland were always these steam valves where a lot of the really free thinkers had to get out from under the really the tyrannical, the combination of state and church power that was on and off in places like England and France. Germany, with its patchwork for a long time, you could sort of cross the border and deal with all of those issues. But so the Netherlands and Switzerland really became places where heretics could go and not die. And, of course, the rise of the Netherlands, and I'm sure you know that history far better than I do, the Netherlands and its own history is really phenomenal in the sense of it was an experiment both in Enlightenment thinking. The Dutch were the first in some ways to establish a maritime empire, forerunners in terms of religious liberty, a lot of these ideas went to America. But then at the same time in the Netherlands, you had, stick in the mud dogmatic Calvinists who are just so darn stubborn that, the losers of the Synod of Dort, went out and lost their lives. So, and this is in the 17th century. So there's a lot going on there. And in many ways, what happens in the 18th century is the philosophers and those who are reading them, like Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson, you need a significant power to offset the power of the church. And so essentially what happened was the state comes in and sort of becomes church for, in place of the church. And of course, in the French Revolution, they overreach and it's a mess. And Napoleon comes back and sort of, okay, we're going to modulate this a little bit. And the Netherlands is always, again, a place in the fringe that's sort of synthesizing all of these ideas. Because, I mean, the Netherlands, unlike Germany and France and England, once the really good ideas of the Netherlands get co-opted by the bigger powers, the Netherlands just keeps losing because it just doesn't have the mass to go toe-to-toe with England or France or Spain or Germany. It's just always that little place. But it always becomes this sort of interesting incubator for heretics who want to play with ideas. And so, and in some ways, that's kind of you too.
Well, I mean, I'm very careful that I don't hear myself saying, now I found it. Yeah. Because I find myself attracted to ideas in Catholicism, but I'm of the conviction that I should also read the Institutes, or at least try to read some interpretation of the Institutes that I can follow. And, I want to understand more about what were the different schools of thought that arose, and where did they get their ideas, and why did Luther think what he think? And I sort of know the basic ideas of it, but it's as humans, we really like to find the one thing that explains it all, especially in science, and that should be simple and fit on the back of a postcard. But I don't know. I mean, I kind of hope I can grab a couple of things, like I don't intend to leave my church and go to a different church, because I really like my church and the people have been welcoming there, and they're okay with me experimenting. Like, at some point, I'm just kind of like, I'm just going to do what I do. So I'm probably the only guy in church who does that. But when we pray the Our Father, I finish with the sign of the cross. And people probably think that's weird, but if they'd ask me, I could quote Luther at them, who said you should do that in the morning and the evening. So why not after prayer? I mean, there you go. That's Luther. Therefore, nobody asks me, but I have to sort of have an answer. And that mainly came because I prayed using Hallow, and that's an app. And then, you pray using, and then that starts to become a habit, so.
But my point is not, I'm not trying to finger you as a heretic or correct you.
No.
Like, but my point is that the Netherlands developed this culture that.
Well, you have to, as a small trading company that wants to be friends with everybody, you kind of have to, like, oh, you do that? That's cool. You have those things? That's cool too. Who wants what?
Well, and I think, it was really interesting during the Peterson wave that, he really seemed to, I mean, some of the Dutch bloggers and podcasters kind of grabbed onto him in a very interesting way. And, also in Australia did as well, which is also interesting, but I think for other reasons. So I don't know, maybe this is me getting in touch with some of my Dutch roots, but I find it quite amazing, and I found this quite amazing early on, that my fascination in a Canadian psychologist led me into a relationship from the Netherlands. And it's like, why would that be? Is it, and of course, Dennis says, well, you've got a Dutch face. So
yeah, I guess you do.
Well, it was always
Dutch hair.
It was, yeah. It was always the case that when when I was a missionary in the Dominican Republic, and we would be flying back to Grand Rapids from, you usually fly from the DR to Houston or Miami to New York, or one of these places. And if you're going on to a place like Grand Rapids, you could always find the gate that was going to Grand Rapids, because you go over there and it's like, those people have a certain look. It's a very Dutch. But yet you didn't marry a Dutchie from Grand Rapids. You married someone else from Grand Rapids. So
Yeah, I found the one American.
no,
Who's not
there's a whole
there.
bunch of them. The Dutch are only on the southeast side. So
Yeah, but like, especially where she lived in Grand Rapids and thereabouts, just full of them. They're everywhere. The first time I went there, I had so much fun just looking at all the shop signs with Dutch last names. I had no idea about that. Yeah, Mallory made fun of the Sma's and the Stra's and if you had that sort of name, you were Dutch. But I didn't know it was that bad. I mean, it's probably not the right wording. I didn't know there were. I didn't know there were that many. But yeah, I mean, we went to one time I was there. Her grandfather had passed, and so I went along to the funeral, and he was Catholic. And afterwards, the priest comes to me and says to me in my own language, asks me if I'm Catholic. That's he still spoke that language. I mean, not fluently, but yeah, it's amazing how that culture remained there.
yeah, yeah.
Did you see the maps that were being going around on the Discord server recently in the general channel? Sam Adams and others, they were posting all these maps about religious
Oh,
distributions,
yeah,
and
yeah,
you
yeah.
see these couple of white squares of no denomination in the west of Michigan. That's where they are.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and but again, back to my other point that the Dutch are, and the Swiss to a degree too. I mean, again, Geneva was this weird little place where, oh, the king's after you, so go and be a refugee in Geneva, which of course was John Calvin. He was a Frenchman who was snuck over across the line to Geneva where he can kind of do his things. The Pilgrims in England, they sneak over to the Netherlands to kind of do their thing, and then they
Hmm.
want, they're worried that their children are going to become Dutch. So no, let's go off to the New World so they can starve to death. Which is what most of them did. Because they didn't know how to grow food there.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
but anyway, so I find the role of the Dutch quite interesting in all of this. And I find that a culture of tolerance and openness and exploration, but also a rootedness. Um, and I think that's really key to doing. That's really key to leaning into the future. You need both. And so again, I'm in terms of this little corner of the internet, I'm not surprised that we have an Orthodox icon carver because Peugeot sort of, his dogged, I mean, people don't recognize how conservative it is required to be Orthodox. Um, so you have that sort of rootedness, but you also need the openness and the tolerance to, okay, Job's going to put up a crucifix. Okay, Job's going to, they're going to work the rosary. And what's so funny is that 50 years ago, that kind of talk in the Christian Reformed Church in North America, oh, you'd be in so much trouble. And today, you've got preachers, oh, those are spiritual disciplines and this is something we should pursue. So it's just very interesting the way these things are getting cycled and cycling around again.
I think there's a whole bunch of churches in my town who would not be okay with this at all.
Yeah.
My church happens to be, but so yeah, the, there is a degree of openness in the Netherlands that also exposes itself in its politics and the way we have these endless. There has to be a stable combination between several parties in order to and the way we agree and argue about things. You can kind of see that starts to creak at the seams in a crisis like this, and for good reason. I mean, which system wouldn't? But yeah, it and I wouldn't have been this open to just kind of experimenting with things if I hadn't had the secular upbringing, the mostly secular upbringing that I'd had.
Yep.
If I told my Christian Reformed neighbors that I'm that I pray a rosary, they'd probably look at me like, that's a Catholic thing. Why would you do that?
Right.
So it really depends on, you can't tell this to everybody either, I think. There, not that I can't tell this on this recording, but there are people in my town who I probably can't discuss this with.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, and that makes the internet a very strange place because we're, you know, at least, over 1,000 people will watch this video and nobody else in your town will know it. Or hardly
Yeah.
anybody else in your town would know it.
Someday that'll bite me. I mean, someday these two worlds meet way more than they did before, I notice.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's like, you tweeting that video, that the Stammtisch video. You tweeted it and you mentioned my Twitter name.
Yeah.
And then like, you know what? It's been 2.5 years. I'll retweet that. Like at this point, I can defend my decisions.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's 2.5 years, boy. You're still not following me on Twitter. I don't know what's up with that.
I don't follow you on Twitter?
Yeah, never. I just figured I said something to offend you. No, it's okay.
I'm sorry.
Don't be. No,
I'm gonna fix that. I can't believe that that's true.
It's true.
It's because of that.
Yeah, I'm not chosen. Yeah.
I still don't follow you on Twitter. Holy cow! I can't believe that. Well, that's fixed.
All right. Oh boy. Oh boy. Oh boy.
Catholic News Agency. Job retweeted. Babylon B. Job retweeted.
Quotes by John Haldane, probably.
Well, maybe it's because you tweet in Dutch, and I still can't.
Hardly.
Will Twitter translate that for me? No.
Probably pretty decently.
Interesting. So let's talk a little bit about that video. That really, Vindonk. So, Vindonk and I were planning the video that I just released today. And he said, "Oh, you got to watch this video." And so I watched it. And I really love John's idea of, and I think it's the right way to go, figuring out how to support people looking to start local groups, because it's really hard. It's not just hard in terms of starting them, but it's hard in terms of maintaining them. And as I said in the video, I've got an unfair advantage that because of my YouTube channel and because I hitched a ride on Jordan Peterson's wave and I surfed that a little bit, I can generate attention better than most, but I still also do believe that the path forward will require. So again, will require people I have a bad habit of not finishing my thoughts aloud. I finish them in my head, but of course none of you can hear that. Moving forward will require figuring out how to meet together. When you and I and Vindonk hung out for those few days, bonds develop in ways that can't in any other way. And so the physical community aspect, and this is part of how COVID is destroying churches right now, the physical community aspect there's just way too much that binds us together in that way than we are aware of. And so I was looking at 18th century, these salons. And of course, here in America, if you say salon, you think nail salon, hair salon. But these salons, which were basically dinner parties where people would get together and talk and wrestle and maintain their relationships with other people in their age. And these were often run by women, which is very interesting. They were often women who were married young and their husbands got old or died. And so they had the building and the money and the time. And so then they held these, and these salons were just critical for the development of the culture. Now led to the French Revolution, but they were critical for the development of the culture. And when I look at probably what we need to do on the way forward, again, these estuary ideas of figuring out not only how we can get together, but how we can make the most of our time when we get together. And at our meetup in Sacramento, we're notoriously we're not really terribly organized. And so sometimes we'll have meetups where the conversations really are vital, and sometimes we just kind of get together. And part of that is the rhythm of life. So I was really interested in that conversation that you and Matthias and Dave had along those lines. But I think, you know, for you, obviously for a lot of us who have churches, church fits a part of that. But I do think we need to figure out how to create communities that are a bit more open than churches can be. Now, maybe your church seems pretty high in openness, but I think this is an issue in a lot of places. And I think the church needs this as much as people outside the church need this. I don't know. You've been you know, you on the Discord server, you are down for one of the less enthusiastic people about estuary. So I'm curious what your thoughts are.
I found it I find it difficult to identify a real question.
Where do you find, well, we found it on the internet, but okay, let me ask it this way. Do you feel you are going to need an in-person space to work through the kinds of questions that you've obviously been working through for the last 2-3 years? Or is the internet alone sufficient?
That is a difficult question to answer for multiple reasons.
That's why it's a good question.
Now I have to navigate this carefully because there are a number of people on the Discord, and they know who they are, who I've had very interesting and great and wonderful conversations with. Would those have been better if they'd been in person? Probably. It's not like we chose to have them online. Imagine, you know, because to take my example of when I was really depressed, and everything in you is just telling you to kill yourself, and there's no hope. There's just no hope. It's over. You'll never have what you had, and you know you're not going to be a dad, and it's just the element of being able to reach out in person. I think, I don't know, I think there's a dimension to that gets lost if it's online. Not that there's not genuine help and compassion and words of wisdom and comfort. It's as sincere as it would be in real life. But I don't know. I think there's a Emmanuel Levinas way of the face of the other in there, and there's
Well, it's interesting in your case because, again, to go back all the way through all of our videos, I mean, you discovered Peterson, and then you started watching my videos. And so a lot of the stuff that you were working through, a lot of this stuff came to you through online. And then, you know, relationships began to form. We started the Discord server. you know, again, more and more relationships, but at the same time, you had relationships within your firefighting brigade. You had, and I think this is a big component and something that many people don't have. You had a really good, viable church option. And from everything that, you know, I've heard, you know, a really wonderful pastoral option. I mean, that just came together for you. And I know a lot of people struggle with those things. But, you know, part of what many in the Discord or some in the Discord have said to me is, well, they've got their relationships online in this, you know, Bridges of Meaning area and this Randos area. And we're doing this thinking together, and that's sort of online. And then they've got their work relationships. They might even have church relationships. And to a degree, I have this too. Rick watches my videos. Some of the people from the meetup watch my videos. Some of them hardly ever watch my videos. So we get these segments of communities, and obviously for a lot of us, it's being mediated electronically. You and I are reading the same books. You and I have been together in person now a couple of times. So there's your first trip and then your second trip. And so there is a way that I know you now that I couldn't have known you without those meetings. And the same is true of, you know, the meetup that we had in Tucson, you know, KG guy and Cassidy. And it was a whole lot of fun, you know, being in person with them. But I mean, part of what okay, so what's going on with my channel and with Peterson and with Bridges of Meaning? I mean, these relationships that are being mediated by the internet are significant for all of us. And our lives, I mean, not just your life. I mean, you've made a transformation from this nihilistic atheism into the Christian faith. And we all pay attention to that. But, you know, I've been making transformations too in these 3 years. And if you go back and you look at my early videos and you listen to me now, I've continued to think and to grow. And so I've also been having transformations over these last few years, much of it mediated by YouTube, Twitter, Discord, some of it in terms of the local meetup. But, you know, people will sometimes, they'll look at me as a pastor in church, and then they'll look at my videos and they're like, an early reaction to me is, ooh, I kind of want to know what you do in church. And then they see me in church and doing a sermon, and they're like, well, that's kind of like church. It's like, well, yeah, it is like church. And now if you're paying attention, you'll notice that some of the other stuff sort of bleeds into it, but formally it stays fairly in line with church, because there's a whole group of people in the room there that are actually the primary audience. But when we're doing the things like we're doing right here and right now, that other primary audience is this weird community that's mediated by this electronic media. And what's so interesting about you with this question, Job, is because you actually know a lot about this stuff, because in your professional life, you work with accessibility and this type of media. And so to me, that's another aspect, not only your Dutchness, but also your day job. You have a deeper knowledge of, well, where are the accessibility sweet spots, and where are the high friction accessibility resistance areas in what we're doing. And then if in fact these media that we're using that are intermediating intermediating these relationships that have sweet spots and resistance areas, how then does that warp and shape and mold the product, which is, what you and I are becoming?
There's a lot there. I think part of the Discord for a good amount of the people is always the hope to meet. The other day, there was a user, I don't remember when they joined because they had a funny name. Kartoffelhorst, which is German for like potato forest or something like that. He suddenly comes online, starts talking about something he made to help people stop smoking. Suddenly, Charlie gets involved, who's trying to quit smoking. Keep at it, Charlie. I know you're listening. You can do it, buddy.
Master of the Discord.
I've been wondering if I should keep notes. Suddenly Matthias comes online. They start talking. They're both German. Pop, 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 pop. And the next day they meet because they discover they're like, 40 miles away from each other. That spirit lives for a good number of people in the Discord in the sense that I'm going to be there. Oh, I'm going to be there. Oh, let's meet. Let's talk because we have a shared interest. And I've been in online communities where that just doesn't exist, where sort of the contact is fleeting. And in the Discord, there's a lot of contact with the hope of eventually, now we look through a monitor darkly, but someday we'll meet face to face. Know and be known, that thing. And I was in a conference in Texas, and I think Jeff lives in Texas, and I mailed you can you put me in contact with Jeff? And then Jeff drives 4 hours in a rental car, and we go have barbecue. And I see this stuff happen more and more. People share pictures of their babies. Why do you do that if you don't have a particular relationship with, even though you might never meet, you would like to? There's a very much an intent of wanting to be an offline community. I have no idea if this is answering your question, but I think that's what makes the Discord so important. And then not even are we going to meet offline, we're going to meet offline to disagree on things with each other. Who does that? I'm going to, we're basically professional arguers. I make light of it, but there's something there that makes this Discord work. Because I've heard of plenty of people coming to this Discord and they say, "This is a strange Discord. I haven't been to Discords like this," and the mods hardly ever need to step in. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there are people who just come there for the memes, and that's fine. But often you see people come in and say, "Oh, I'm here. Who else is from around here? Who can I talk to?" And I said that to Matthias and David. They're so often the question. I'm bursting at the seams with these ideas that Peterson, brought alive within me. And I've been watching all of Paul's videos, and nobody around me I can talk to. And I need to talk to people about this because I need to know it's not just me and my crazy ideas.
Yeah. Well, that's how I started. I mean, I watched Peterson stuff, and it's like, oh, I want to talk to somebody about this. Who can I talk? And I CRC voices, but didn't want to dominate that conversation with this, and make a YouTube and see if anybody else out there wants to talk, and just start a meetup. It just grew and grew. But I think you're right. It is. And that to come full circle back to the trip that was canceled because of COVID, I was really looking forward to, meeting a number of the people as we go up. And whenever we did meetups, it was always fun because there'd be a few people who would show up and, I didn't know them from the comments, or they had never contacted me in any way, but then bang, they show up and I've been watching your videos and this is who I am, and this is what I think, and these are the other aspects of my life. And Oh, it was just quite remarkable. So yeah, I can't, I'm always thinking about the age to come, and I think about something like the meetup as, that we're just planning our calendars for the age to come. That I might not get a chance to meet all these people, but I do plan on meeting them uh, in the next dispensation. So I don't know.
Here's a
That's what I
funny
think.
thing. I don't know if this relates, but it could. What Peterson did to me, well, I think that it was Peterson. It could also have been some religious thing, I don't know, but it got me from here to outward. It made me really want to get in contact with people, to relate, to talk, to know what the other person thinks, instead of being stuck in my head and basically in hell. I've seen that uh, I've seen that same sentiment expressed by other people. Like, oh, I need to get out and talk to people, and I've been trying to find like-minded people. Like, there's something about, I would be careful to say, religious experience that forces us to get out in the world and share whatever good news we found. And I don't know what that is psychologically. It is a very strange thing, but it was light and day as far as I can trace it back. And I think that's that same spirit on the Discord. And what the Discord also is, it's not a forum. It's an ethereal list of constant conversation. So it kind of becomes people have just conversations there. They're not premeditated. They're not like, oh, this person said this, I'm going to take my sweet time and compose a well nuanced reply. It's very much oh yeah, oh, and here's this and here's that. And then, sometimes it's a whole fire hose. And sometimes it can be a bit violent. But the way that it is sort of ephemeral, even though it's not, because you can search, but it feels ephemeral. I think that really makes people just talk the way they would talk. It comes the closest to being near each other, apart from all in a Zoom call. Because a Zoom call is sort of draining in a different way,
Yeah.
because you're looking at a person, but not really.
Yeah.
And here we're just we can spend our cognitive efforts reading what they're writing, and we can reply, but we reply sort of in real time.
Yeah.
And I think that has something to do with it.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think that's good. And you said something about something about Peterson. Rod over at Nuance Forum. Same thing with him. He and I both had the same idea that I'd go to these Peterson events, in Sacramento or the Bay Area, and there'd be 2, 3, 4,000 people there, and you'd look around, and these people wanted to talk to other people about this, and they couldn't. That's part of the reason we started the meetup. And a lot of times, the very early meetups, when we would get together, people would get there and they'd be like, if they were married, they'd be like, I keep trying to talk to my wife about this, and she's like, I don't want to talk about that stuff.
Hang on 1 second. I'm going to read you something, because I actually wrote this out and I just looked it up. This was last Saturday. I wrote it down for Discord because it was funny. I said, Saturday, my wife and I went for a nice walk in the sun. I had just been reading a bunch of philosophy beforehand. Halfway the walk, the conversation was like this. Me. Doesn't it strike you as odd that assuming rational thought is possible and the world is intelligible is basically a position of faith, and that in a naturalist frame, our senses being able to accurately interpret the world is highly unlikely? She's like, no, I don't think about those things. Me. How can you not think about those things? Even the rocks on the side of the road cry out for an explanation. The fact that anything exists requires investigation. No, things just are. You can't just say things are. That's a philosophical position. No, it's not. Yes, it is. And she's just laughing at that point. Not everybody cares about these things. And I'm laughing because we're both just, because we think it's funny. Well, they should. So
Yeah.
I very much, I saw that same a vibe on the Peterson a tour. Like, yeah,
Yeah.
people were all trying to find these little clusters of people they could talk to.
Yeah. 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 And I'm surprised. So there was in Quillette, there's a really nice article written by a young man who had a very Jordan Peterson story. Jordan Peterson came into the story. He was a farrier and he was in Sacramento. And so one of the people in our local Discord, grabbed that, or in our local meetup, grabbed that and sent it on our Sacramento Discord, just for our Sacramento group. And again, it was like, how is this guy avoided us? I mean, why isn't he here why isn't he coming to our meetups? And, part of that was when Peterson was in Sacramento, there's like 3,000 people there. And I'm like, why aren't all these people at our meetups? What's wrong with them that they're missing the meetings? Because, and I'm not saying that in kind of a, acquisitive sense, but I'm saying it in my much more nosy sense. I want to know their stories. I want to know where they're at. I want to know what they think.
Yeah.
I went to a party with a group of people that was in my wife's circle of friends, and I bumped into a guy he had a podcast, and he had been in drugs earlier in his life and had a bad relationship with his father, and had found Jordan Peterson and cleaned up his room and was marrying his girlfriend and was going to have a baby. I mean, just doing the whole cycle. And it's like, why aren't you at our meetup? What's wrong with you? Because and it isn't necessarily just important that they be at my meetup. I want them to be in a meetup, because again, this is my sheepdog pastoral sense of me, that if you're going to make progress in this stuff going forward, and you're going to be able to sustain your gains, you're going to need a structure around you. You're going to continue to need people to talk to. You're going to continue to need, and there needs to be leadership in this structure. There needs to be authority. There needs to be consistency. There needs to be accountability. And that's exactly why I got into this stuff with Peterson, because I saw him lighting up. I saw lights coming on in thousands of people's eyes. And it's like, as a pastor, I know those lights are going to go out unless you have a group of people that you can continue to work on this stuff with. Otherwise, it's going to go dead, and you're going to think about, oh yeah, I read that Jordan Peterson book, and that was a good book, and I had all these ambitions and ideas about how to change my life, and nothing ever came of it. Because I see that kind of stuff all the time.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I don't have anyone in my village who I can talk to about this.
Yeah.
If you're watching, I'm in Zuid-Holland. We can meet. I know you're out there. Not doxing myself by saying exactly where I live, but
I couldn't even write down what you just said, Job, and so I think again, that's part of the crafty Dutchness. I mean, how many people know Dutch? I mean, it's not that many, and
no,
so anyway.
Yeah, we shouldn't have traded New Amsterdam for New York. That was a bad deal.
Yeah, well, again, the Dutch, you just don't have enough of you. You're going to lose. You can't fight England and France and Germany and Spain. It's just not going to work.
Nope. No. Too bad. Yeah. Let's not go into the history. There's some dark history that I'm not going to go into. Yeah. No, but I think, yeah, I think you're right. We struggling with God and a lot of other things on your own is just really difficult. And at some point you get tired. And it's like trying to, bad example. Well, maybe it's not a bad example. It's like trying to quit smoking. They all say you need a support network. It's AA, you need a support network. Anything that's a struggle needs a support network.
That's right.
And
the support is multifaceted. You need a group of people. I mean, if you look at what happens at an AA meeting, it's a lot of people thinking out loud and having, something someone's going to hear. It's going to be, okay, I've listened to you now, and there's this, or there's that, or think about this, or I'll hold you accountable there. And that's a lot of what you need, but you also need new information. And then again, when I look at all of this stuff, it's like, well, it's obvious to me why church is shaped the way it is, because over a long period of time, that's what we've been doing. And it's just really interesting that we've been doing it around this figure of Jesus Christ. That, and again, Peter, here is this, we have these 4 little books. We call them books, but they're really, these weird little things, 4 little gospels, and then these other people around them who it's, okay, so this man, it's very Jungian. So this man is the ideal human being. And now none of us are going to become first century Jewish carpenters, but there's going to be some kind of transference, and church can call that the Holy Spirit. There's going to be some kind of transference from this man's life into my time and my space right now that is going to be sufficiently viral and infectious that not only will it reshape me as an individual, but it will, our entire society, a la Tom Holland, our entire society is going to take on this shape in a principality, larger scale embodied form. And that's going to be good for the world. But this process of talking and idealizing and analysis and accountability, all of that will have to be built into this. And it's going to take lifetime after lifetime after lifetime after lifetime to actually arrive at this. And so all of our little individual lives, on one hand, are deeply important and matter. That's part of the code. But another part of the code is that all of our little lives are just little, stepping stones for this much larger, greater embodied picture of what Christ, and that's the Pauline Christ, of what Christ will be, that Christ will be all in all.
He is in every place, my Lord.
Yes, that's exactly right. And so it's, and the thing that after listening to Tom Holland has really continued to fester in my mind is that on one hand you have churches which are these little intense places within this overall network, these little intense nodes. But again, listening to Brett and Heather, I'm just thinking, yeah, Heather's gonna pop first. Boy, I'm listening to her, and she's gonna pop, and that's gonna, what's poor Brett gonna do? Because I'll tell you, he keeps, well, it can't be supernatural. It can't be supernatural. And Alistair McGrath told you about that word, and you should listen to him, because Alistair McGrath is no dummy. That you're using that word, and that word isn't going to protect you from him. It isn't going to protect you from him. And so anyway,
yeah,
they're going to pop. I'm watching it happen. We're watching it happen.
Yeah. All we can do is be there for the message.
Okay, we're gonna send in Job. We're gonna send in the pastor of the Discord. Yeah, I played with these ideas, and I always thought I can just go back. I can just go back to doubting the supernatural and being afraid of it, and I can turn around anytime I want to. Yeah, just keep telling yourself that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right.
Oh, Job, what time is it there now? It's probably getting pretty late for you.
Yeah, and I got a birthday party to go to.
Tonight? Yeah.
Yeah, it's a neighbor kid, and he lives next door. So, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, as always, Job, it's a pleasure. And, yes, next time you have to be in the States. Well, who knows when borders will, did I ever think I'd be saying this? Borders will open, and Job and conferences will recommence, and Job will wind up in somewhere in our region, and then we'll do our, here's the question. Do we have to go back to Tucson again? I don't know.
Look, let's see if President West lets me in first, and then we'll see. Yeah. Okay. Paul, it was
Job.
delightful to talk with you again, man. I've missed our conversations. This was really great.
Yeah, I look forward to the day where we can, be sitting there on Vendonk's porch and beating him up over something.
Okay.
We can be telling the lights to go off. This is so John Vendonk, who is just tech savvy enough to get himself into trouble, has his whole house wired with the Google thing to turn the lights off. Joe is turning the lights off on John.
It was such a well put ending to the whole road trip that couldn't be. So
That's right. That's right. All right. Well, and say happy birthday to the little soul for me.
I will.
Okay, Joe.
God
Take
bless you,
care.
Paul.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Take care.